So here's where we are. You just learned 3 truths about serial starters that explain everything. All right, so we got one, they're not lying when they say you're different. You know, they genuinely feel that way in the beginning, but they're addicted to the feeling of falling, not the work of building. 2, they mistake emotional intensity for emotional depth. They can share their feelings when everything is just easy, but they can't do the actual work of intimacy when things get complicated. You know, we got 3, they're not looking for a person, they're looking for a feeling. And once you stop providing that feeling of newness, you become replaceable, no matter how incredible you are. These 3 truths work together to create one of the most exhausting patterns in modern relationships. The addiction keeps them chasing beginners. The intensity tricks them into thinking they're building depth, and the focus on feeling prevents them from actually valuing the person. And in that space between these forces, real connection just becomes impossible, replaced by just this endless cycle of starting, fading, and starting over. But here's what you need to understand. This doesn't have to be your story forever. Whether you've been hurt by a serial starter or you recognize patterns in yourself, there is a way out, and it starts with understanding what's really happening beneath the pattern. You know, serial starters aren't bad people. That's not what we're saying. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They genuinely want connection, but they've confused the beginning of the relationship with the relationship itself. So they think the intensity of month 1 is what love feels like. So what they do is when that intensity starts to fade in month 4, they think the love is gone. They think the excitement of someone new is what connection is. So when that excitement wears off, they think, you know, the connection is broken. They think the feeling of falling is what relationships are supposed to feel like forever. So when that falling stops, they think the relationship is over. But that's not how real relationships work. You know, real relationships don't stay real relationships don't stay in the beginning forever. The intensity, of course, fades. The newness wears off. The excitement transitions into something more steadier, calmer, deeper. And that transition from intensity to intimacy, from falling to building, from new to familiar, is where real love actually begins. But the serial starters, they never make it there because they mistake the end of the beginning. Sorry, they mistake the end of the beginning for the end of the relationship. So they leave, or they fade, or they emotionally check out while physically staying, and they start to look for the next beginning. You know, the next person who can give them that feeling again. But not because the person they're with wasn't enough, but because they're incapable of actually appreciating what comes after the beginning ends. And now, if you've been hurt by a serial starter, here's what you need to understand. First, it wasn't about you. You didn't fail. You weren't boring. You weren't inadequate. Okay? You just stopped being new. That's all. And they're addicted to the newness. That's not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their capacity. And second, you can't keep someone who's only equipped for beginnings anyway. No amount of staying interesting, staying exciting, staying new will make them stay, because the problem isn't that you stop being interesting. It's that they're incapable of appreciating the middle. And third, stop trying to be chosen by people who are only capable of choosing you temporarily. You deserve someone who can actually build with you, not just fall for you. Someone who values depth, not just intensity. You know, someone who stays when the newness wears off. And then 4, watch for the pattern early as well. Serial starters reveal themselves if you know what to look for. They come on incredibly strong. They create intense connection very quickly. They make grand gestures and big promises early on. And then around month 3 or 4, they start to fade. The effort starts to decrease. The consistency wavers, as they say. They become distant. And if you see this pattern, don't blame yourself. You know, don't try harder to keep their interest. Recognize that you're dealing with someone who's only capable of beginnings, and decide whether you want to invest in someone with that limitation. You know, fifth, require consistency, not just intensity. Don't be impressed so easily by someone who's, amazing for 3 months. Be impressed by someone who's still showing up in month 6, month 12, year 2. Anyone can be intense in the beginning. Real partnership is about who can be consistent in the middle. And if you recognize that the serial starter pattern in yourself, here's what you need to understand. First, the boredom that you feel in month 4 isn't about the person you're with. It's about your addiction to the feeling of newness. Every time you felt that restlessness, that sense that something's missing, that desire to move on, it wasn't because the person was wrong for you. It was because the newness had worn off and you don't know how to function without it. And second, you're not actually bored with them. You're bored with the absence of intensity. There's a big difference there. Being bored with someone means they're not interesting. They're not, not compatible, not right for you. Being bored with the absence of intensity means you're addicted to a feeling that can't last. And you've just mistaken the end of that feeling for the end of the relationship. And third, the person you're with isn't the problem. Your expectations are. You're expecting the beginning to last forever. You're expecting constant excitement, constant newness, constant intensity, but that's just not how relationships work. The beginnings actually end, the excitement fades, and what's left is partnership, which is a lot deeper, more meaningful, more fulfilling than intensity, but only if you're capable of appreciating it. Fourth, start practicing staying. So the next time you feel that restlessness, the boredom, the desire to move on, don't. Stay. Kind of sit with the discomfort for a bit, work through it, see what's on the other side of the urge to leave. You might discover that the boredom isn't actually about the person, it's about your discomfort with the transition from falling to building. And if you can just push through that discomfort, you might discover a depth of connection you've never experienced because you've never stayed long enough to actually find it. And fifth, redefine what you're looking for. Stop chasing the feeling of falling. Start building the capacity for staying. Stop seeking intensity. Start appreciating consistency. And stop looking for someone who gives you the high of newness. Start valuing someone who can actually build depth with you over time. And this requires a fundamental shift just in how you approach relationships. It means recognizing that the excitement of month 1 isn't the relationship, it's the audition. You can see it like that. The relationship begins when the excitement starts to fade and you have to choose each other anyway. It means understanding that boredom in month 4 isn't a sign to leave. It's a sign that you're just transitioning from chemistry to partnership. And partnership is where real intimacy lives. It means accepting that no person will stay new forever. And if newness is what you need to stay interested, you'll spend your entire life starting over, never experiencing the depth that comes from actually building something. So here's a practice to start with. Next time you're in the early stages of a relationship with someone new and you feel that intense connection, that excitement, that sense of this is it, just pause and ask yourself, am I falling for this person or am I falling for the feeling of falling? Am I building connection with who they are, who they actually are, or am I high on the newness of it all? And then commit to staying past the point where the newness wears off. Commit to month 6, month 12. Commit to seeing what's there when the intensity fades. You might discover that without the distraction of intensity, you actually see the person clearly. And you might find that building with them is more fulfilling than falling for them ever was. Or, you might discover that you genuinely aren't compatible, that the relationship doesn't work beyond the beginning anyway. And that's okay too. But at least you'll know it's actually about compatibility, not just about your addiction to newness. The goal isn't the goal isn't to force yourself to stay in relationships that just don't work. That's not the goal. The goal is to develop the capacity to stay long enough to know whether they work. instead of leaving the moment the high of newness wears off. And this isn't easy. If you're a serial starter, the urge to leave when things get boring will be strong. You know, the pull towards new or someone new will feel irresistible. The belief that this person isn't right for me will actually feel true. But you've got to recognize that that's the addiction talking. You know, that's your nervous system seeking the high it's used to. That's your pattern trying to just repeat itself. And the only way to break that pattern is to stay when everything in you wants to leave, to build when everything in you wants to start over, to appreciate depth when everything in you is craving intensity. This is the work, and it's hard, you know, but it's the only path to real, lasting connection. Because the truth is, you can spend your entire life collecting beginnings. You know, you can have 100 intense 3-month relationships. You can experience the high of falling over and over and over, but you'll never really experience real intimacy. You know, not real partnership, not depth, because those things only exist in the middle, the place where you keep leaving before you actually get there. Drake is almost 40 and he's still running the same pattern, still chasing the same feeling, still starting and never finishing. He's one of the biggest artists in the world. He's incredibly successful. He's talented, wealthy, famous, but he's alone. You know, still collecting beginnings, still unable to build anything that really lasts. You don't have to do the same. You can choose differently. When you can develop the capacity to stay. You can learn to appreciate what comes after the beginning ends. But it requires you to recognize the pattern. You know, you've got to recognize that pattern to face your addiction to newness, to sit with it, to sit with the discomfort of boredom instead of just running, to choose building over falling. That's where your freedom is. That's where real connection lives. That's where you finally stop exhausting yourself and everyone around you with endless beginnings that go nowhere. The question is, are you willing to do the work? You know, are you willing to stay when the excitement fades? To build when the falling is over? To see what's possible in the middle instead of constantly chasing new beginnings? Because if you can develop that capacity, everything changes. You stop breaking hearts, you know, you stop getting your heart broken. You stop wondering why nothing ever lasts, and you start building something real, something deep, something that fulfills you in ways that intensity never could. This is the path beyond the serial starter pattern, not a path where you force yourself to stay in relationships that don't work, but a path where you develop the capacity to know whether they work, because you've actually stayed long enough to see what's there when the newness wears off. Next video coming up is Ascension, guys, where we move towards how we ascend. Okay, so stay tuned for that. And as always, stay beautiful, stay connected, and stay conscious in the film.